Hi folks, so the last video I did was on Mercury's transit in Pisces, and as you probably recall, I did that video on the last day of Mercury's transit in Pisces and explained why, and I'll place a link to that video at the end of this one just so you can revisit that, because the sign of Pisces has its own importance this year and next year. Mercury entered the sign of Aries on April 4th or 5th, depending on where you are, and is in Aries till April the 19th. Mercury, as you know, as many of you know, is a planet of, above all, communication, transactions, technology, commuting, cars, vehicles, siblings, relatives, cousins, neighbors, neighborhoods, interactions, communications with colleagues. Who constitutes your community on a day-to-day basis? Who are the people who populate the well you live in and day out? And the content and the quality and the nature of your interactions with them, whether it is through technology like Zoom or social media, whether it is because we live in an age of real as well as virtual communities now on a day-to-day basis. We inhabit a real well where we live and where we work and how we physically communicate and when you're on your way to work, do you drive by the same McDonald's, the same Starbucks, or same place to get your cup of coffee? Do you see roughly the same people? What is the nature of your interactions with them? And then, of course, even though typically colleagues are not always, interactions with colleagues, especially because for so many of us, they constitute, and if it's not colleagues, the people we encounter in our work lives, it really does constitute so much of what Mercury governs. Outside of that, as I said, technology, transactions, etc. Mercury in the sign of Pisces till April the 4th, as I mentioned, was not in its happiest of states, and a lot of people reported technology issues and minor Mercury retrograde glitches. So it's very likely or possible, if you look back over the last 4 or 5 days, that technology solutions have been, or technology issues, things have become more solution-oriented. So if you were dealing with a technology issue, or you continue to deal with a technology issue, there's a directness and an immediacy to the solutions that come up. I was dealing with this, I researched this, now I figured this out, now I can do this. New solutions, new ways to go about it. I've been having trouble uploading videos to YouTube, and not just me, even some other channels I follow, I would notice that they would do one upload, and that upload would be grayed out, and they would have to do a second upload, and the same thing was happening to me. It's, whatever that glitch was, but found a different way to do it after much agonizing after 2 or 3 weeks. So, a lot of that kind of stuff. I'm not loving the headroom on this video, but I'm going to keep doing it anyway. A lot of learning there. Irrespective, Mercury in Aries is much more direct, much more forthright, and it wouldn't surprise me if since April the 4th, if there were things that you were sitting on, or things that seemed emotionally nebulous, or even spiritually nebulous or unclear, it wouldn't surprise me if after the last 4 or 5 days, or even as Mercury, whenever a planet is about within 5 degrees of changing a sign, I've noticed that you can start to feel the ingress, you can start to feel the entry, you can start to feel that energy. So even, let's just say the past 10 days or so, I wouldn't be surprised if you felt greater pressure to get on with it, to get it out, to start communicating, to talk about things, and the sign of Aries is direct, forthright, and represents you. It represents me. It represents the individual. It represents the client. It represents the subject. It represents you, the individual. And so it wouldn't be surprising at all if the nature of the communication, of the interaction, of the things they're sitting on, they're just that much more forthright, that much more direct, that much less living in Piscean land, living in dream space, living in a place of paralysis, living in a place of, especially when it comes to communication, technology, meetings, being on time, scheduling things, wouldn't surprise me. And even if there are issues that are still lingering, wouldn't be surprising if both you are more solution-oriented and you find that the universe is more solution-oriented and things are moving forward. The other thing is that when the sun entered Aries, within the last 10 days of March, I sort of declared a Happy New Year. The equinox the March equinox, whether it is spring or autumn or fall for you, is astrologically the start of the new year. And I find that when it comes to starting New Year's, the Sun, Mercury, and Venus and the new moon play a role in the way that new year is going to roll out. And in certain years, Mars can factor into too, because Mars can end up being close to all these planets more frequently than, say, Jupiter or Saturn. So, for example, this year, I may have mentioned this to you or not, but some of you know this. Certainly, my clients know this within the first 2 or 3 readings that I do with them, which I let them know that the new year starts when the Sun enters their rising sign. So if you are a Leo rising, then your new year likely starts around July the 22nd. If you are a Capricorn rising, your new year conveniently starts probably around December 22nd. If you're a Scorpio rising, October 22nd, and thereabouts, give or take a day or two. So it helps to kind of attune with your own 12-month cycle, your own yearly cycle. And even with the start of that new year, depending on when Mercury is going to enter your rising sign, when Venus is going to enter your rising sign, because Mercury, Venus, and the Sun typically travel relatively close to each other, especially Mercury and the Sun. And of course, at some point, if a Sun is in a sign, you're going to have one new moon in that sign. If the new moon occurs in the very first degree, you will get 2 new moons in a sign. Rarely, but it can happen. So there's sort of a gradual unveiling, like 3 or 4 curtains, or when Mars is close to the Sun, 5 curtains opening on your new year in quick succession, kind of a release of energy. And depending on whether the planets are still in your 12th house once the Sun enters, or the new moon occurs in your first house in your rising sign, or whether the Venus, Mercury, and or Mars have moved along to your second house, the quality of the year and the quality of that new year starting, and whether it is more yin and a little bit more contained, or much more yang and much more out of the gate, becomes clear. So even though you have a new year starting around the same time every year, the quality of that new year starting can be different based on how these personal planets are interacting with each other. As far as the sign of Aries is concerned, our global astrological new year starts around the time of the March equinox. But the Sun entered, Venus entered, and then on April the 4th, Mercury entered. And on April the 11th, Sunday or Monday, depending on where you are, 11th or 12th, we have a new moon in Aries. And really, in many respects, this kind of new year energy, within any sign, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, sometimes Mars, will follow relatively close together. The Sun and Mercury especially, but Sun, Mercury, Venus. And while the Sun is there, there'll be a new moon there. And it's the new moon that gets things going. So right now, the Sun and Mercury and Venus are entering a sign before the new moon. So by the time the new moon occurs on April the 11th, whatever is being building up subconsciously through the Sun with regard to relationships and money, and in certain cases creative opportunities or luxurious opportunities, or if you're in a career that is Venusian related to that, Venus's entry, relationships and money especially, and thinking about it, and with Mercury in there communicating and processing about subjects associated with the house that sign is in, and then the new moon occurs, and we are in action. And the days before the new moon, which we are at right now, both start to flatten out and can really have a lot to do with completions. Part of the reason why I did the Mercury in Pisces video, even though we had no time left in that transit, was to encourage you to look at this week as we head to the Aries new moon as still tying up a certain amount of processing and activities related to where the sign of Pisces sits in your chart. The sign of Pisces very often has to do with feedback on endings, is the way I would put it. It has to do with endings and closure on topics. So feedback, I mean the universe's way of giving you feedback, karmic feedback. This is good, this was not so good, these are lessons that need to be learned, I'm going to serve this up to you on plate. Results, endings, closing things out. Now, this particular cycle of Pisces transits, as I said, could very well thematically be linked to crises in 2015, 2016. But we're going to get new beginnings in the sign of Pisces between the middle of May to the end of July of this year and then next year. So Pisces continues to brew, just as Aquarius continues to brew. But starting March the 20th, would not surprise me at all if a certain amount of New Year forward-looking energy was in place. All planets are currently direct. April is a very fast forward-moving month. Developments, forward movement. And as far as the sign of Aries is concerned and where Aries sits in your chart, you know, we had the Sun come into Aries, Venus come into Aries, and now Mercury come into Aries 4 days ago. And it's almost as if we're all sitting in a church or a gathering, and it kind of has this dearly beloved, we are now gathered here to whatever, and then once the new moon occurs, Sunday night, Monday morning, depending on where you are or whatever the time is, we start doing. It's no longer a question of congregating and communicating and exchanging pleasantries. And in some cases, I have to say, the communication may be about providing closure. But there is something to do with actually getting to be in forward-moving action. The new year really gets going. The new year really gets going after this new moon. And Mercury's entry is this last piece of interactions and thinking and processing that needed to occur. Now, Mercury makes two important transits in Aries. One, it's making today to Chiron. And it would not surprise me if over the last, and this is something I really want you to pay attention to, if over the last 3 or 4 days, 5 days, you've headed to, and it could be that something occurred today or as you headed to today, took some action that maybe provides a certain amount of closure, or you thought about something, communicated about something. In its external manifestations, Mercury is primarily about communication, writing emails, picking up the phone, talking, delivering messages, getting messages, transactions. In a more internal way, it can also be about processing. Chiron, understanding Chiron, especially as you head towards the age of 50, becomes really important. And sometimes we think issues related to Chiron have to do with specific people. But sometimes it can be take a certain amount of sleuthing to understand what the Chiron wound, your primary wound that you're carrying in this lifetime that needs to be healed, that you need to learn how to heal, that you need to experience so you can heal. Where it sits and how the Chiron transit is affecting that part of the chart, that house where Aries sits in your chart. And if you know that, then what I'm about to say is going to make even more sense. But even if you don't know that, my question for each of you is going to be, over the last 4 or 5 days, what is it that you have solved or processed? And does it by any chance point you to something that has to do with a fundamental wound that you're carrying? Typically, wounds make us feel not good enough. With Chiron and Aries, it's very likely to do with us and our ability to get things done and go after what we want and what feels truly right to us in our most elemental state. When children are born, I should really say babies, with the first couple of years, you really do get a sense of distinctly who they are and what they bring with them into this world and who they are qualitatively in their unconditioned form. It's very present and it's very clear and it's very visible, that essence. And the sign of Aries very much has to do with that direct, clear essence of who we are internally, unconditioned, unadulterated, authentically. And there could be something to whatever has been hampering with the authenticity of that process, and how hampering with that authenticity of the process has stymied us or stopped us from being able to go after what we want. That over the past 4 or 5 days, with Mercury conjuncting Chiron today, there could have been some sort of a development, something you felt you needed to communicate, or you did communicate, some action you took that is seemingly about one thing, but when you think about it, is really gently and internally and introvertedly, if you think about it, pointing you towards what this fundamental wound is that you are carrying and that Chiron is trying to heal during this transit in this part of your chart. If you're heading towards the age of 50, then it's very likely that it's going to have something to do with your Chiron return and where Chiron sits in your chart and describes the primary wound that you carry in this lifetime. The second transit that is really important is that in the very last degree, Mercury and the Sun, interestingly, move into the sign of Taurus around April the 19th together, hand in hand. But right before they do, they conjunct in the last degree of Aries. When Mercury and the Sun conjunct, it marks an important milestone in the Mercury cycle, which began in the sign of Aquarius when Mercury was retrograde. So if you think about the sign of Aquarius, where it sits in your chart and what it denotes, as you head towards April the 19th, there's a phase of that project that is looking to be completed. It's an external phase. So there are actions that you feel you need to take. Let's say that the sign of Aquarius sits in a certain part of a chart. And if you think about and you know what that part of the chart is, what house it occupies, Aquarius occupies, what that house stands for, it's likely that you could have some sort of a project or a project plan or a set of tasks that need to get done there that'll help take you to the next level, but they likely have a communication aspect to it. You're meeting with people, there are contracts that need to be signed, you're interacting with people. It's important for you to network, it's important for you to be in communication. As you head towards April 19th, the universe is inviting you to do what you need to do to get a certain yang or an implementation aspect of that project plan in place. After April the 19th, for a few weeks, you'll be able to tweak that process, reap the results, adjust it. But till April the 19th, as Mercury heads towards the Sun and they come together in the last degree of Aries, the question is, I wouldn't be surprised if this is already underway, and if there's a link with this Mercury Chiron transit today, the question is, Mercury cycle began in Aquarius, the cycle that we're currently in, it conjuncts with the Sun to burn off a certain phase of that Mercury cycle, and this phase is implementation, taking action towards manifesting something where the sign of Aquarius is in your chart and what house it occupies. And April the 19th presents a kind of a deadline around that. So there's a fair amount of concrete stuff in this particular video, I have to say. I didn't expect it to go this long. Mercury is moving fast. I mean, when Mercury is just spending 2 weeks in a sign, it is moving fast. And as it conjuncts the Sun, it's at its highest speed. Then it's going to go past the Sun, and then at the end of May, it's going to go retrograde, and come back to the Sun. So as it always done, if the Sun is moving this way, Mercury is always doing this. That's why it goes retrograde 3 times a year. So Mercury's entry into Aries, first and foremost, as far as our new year is concerned, signals that prior to April the 11th, everything that we need now in order to start our new year in terms of reflecting subconsciously about where we are at and what we'd like to begin, the process that started around the equinox in March, any meditation or thoughts about relationships and money, and as well as any processing that we need to do is currently underway, and starting the new moon on April 11th or 12th will be truly in action mode. The month of April, as I've said, is very forward-moving, and it would not surprise me at all. March, April, even May, I would argue, especially the first couple of weeks of May, we're still going. We're still experiencing, we're still hurtling forward. We're experiencing forward movement. Those of you who've been watching my channel know what I mean by that. There are times in a year, and 2021 is a much more forward-moving year than 2020. Did we not experience that? So we will see if 2020 felt really stagnant, especially that September, October timeframe. I remember when all those planets were retrograde. 2021 is forward, a little bit of retrograde, forward, a little bit of retrograde, forward. Largely because the only planet that's really going to impact that forward movement significantly is Mercury, which is retrograde, and Venus and Mars don't go retrograde this year for all intents and purposes. I know that there's a retrograde at the end of this year, but as far as I'm concerned, that's 2022 and not 2021. Again, as I said, for all intents and purposes. So the new year gets going, folks. So whatever you've been reflecting on, thinking on, any forward-looking energy, get ready for it to move forward even more after Sunday, Monday. Wouldn't surprise me if there are solutions to, if you've been experiencing communication glitches or you've been in a communication fog for a lot of March into early April. Wouldn't surprise me if solutions are in place. Would not surprise me if you've been much more direct and forthright in your communication over the last 4 or 5 days, especially the last 10 days, last 4 or 5 days. And wouldn't surprise me if over the last 4 or 5 days, as you headed to today, with a Mercury Chiron conjunction, if you haven't taken some sort of action that, as you reflect on it, may point to some sort of wound that prevents you from connecting with your authentic self and manifesting whatever that authentic self is looking to manifest. Mercury conjuncts the Sun on the 18th or 19th, depending on where you are, just before they move into Taurus in the last degree of Aries. And you still have about 10 odd days to continue to implement and be in action around wherever Aquarius sits in your chart, the sign of Aquarius sits in your chart, and what house it occupies, because we are in that communication cycle. So I wish you Piscean and backward looking energy. Sure, it's still present, and it's certainly going to be present over this weekend, before the new moon, because until that new moon, we're still in the Pisces new moon cycle since the middle of March. So you might find that you're reflecting and still dotting the I and crossing the T's on these 2015, 2016 crises items that just kind of have kept going since then in some respects. Where does Pisces sit in your chart? What does it occupy? What is being healed, or what are you spiraling out of or developing out of gradually? And rest assured, there will be further developments in this part of the chart in the summer and next year. But for now, there's a lot of pull to be moving forward and to be paying attention to kind of a new year, a new set of resolutions and a new set of tasks energy too. And during the rest of April and into the first half of May, that remains present. So I've wished you a happy new year already 2 or 3 weeks ago, and certainly with this new moon coming in, it really is going to be all systems go. So I hope with the Mercury Chiron conjunction and where Aquarius is in your chart and what needs to be done there, I hope that that's giving you something to reflect on. The energies around operating and dealing with the Mercury cycles might be that much more powerful right now, because Mercury has not been going retrograde in water signs, it is now in air signs. So actually implementing based on Mercury cycles is much cleaner, much clearer. The gates are much more open. You have much more vitality. Mercury retrogrades and water signs, as we've had over the past 2 or 3 years, have made us achieving and getting things done related to the water signs, even though we've had Mercury cycles that are really murky and emotional and codependent and challenging. Whereas now the energy is just clear. Me, my heart, my truth. What do I want? Who am I? What am I here to do? Move forward. And if these next couple of days feel kind of flat, a little bit depressed, a little bit energy, if you feel like you're closing something, as I said, you may have taken some actions to close something out with this Mercury Chiron conjunction, or take some steps to process, or you'll know what that is as you think about it. Time to move forward. All right. If you found this video useful, feel free to share it, like it, comment on it, subscribe to my YouTube channel, click the bell icon next to the subscribe button to be notified whenever I do new videos, and my contact information is in the description box below. So feel free to reach out to me to inquire about rates for readings, or I can make you an easy-to-read version of your chart that tells you which signs are in which houses and what those houses stand for. You can use that as an accompaniment to these readings on YouTube. You can use it as a resource, whatever that works for you. Inquire about my rates first so that you're comfortable with them before you share any personal information. I will leave it at that, and until the next video, take care.